Welcome to another episode of Swedenborg Foundation's Transcendiots. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Soni Werner. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Soni, you have had quite the career, and the term that comes to mind when I think of you is mediator, someone who comes into a lot of difficult situations and helps people come together, and you've done a number of other things too with your work. And where are you today with that calling?
Well, I would say that currently I am a retired professor. I used to be a Swedenborgian psychology professor, and as I entered into my retirement, I still had some energy and still felt that maybe I could be of use as a volunteer, where I help families and church groups when they are tangled in a conflict that may have been going on for a week or a month or a year, and they desire to still work together, but they either find themselves being very short-tempered with each other, or they avoid the subject, like very sweet at a party, but they can't really get to the real issue, or they're actually yelling at each other, or maybe even judging each other. And so when people are not their best selves, it helps sometimes to have a third person come in who cares about good communication, but is not part of them. And so I've made myself available, and it's been fascinating. When I was still employed as a college professor, the school I was at, Bernathen College, asked me to train all the theological students, the seminary students, so that they would learn another skill to add to all their doctrinal study. So I did that for many, many years and trained a whole batch of young people who have now got at least the basic skills. And we would videotape them, and we would give them feedback about how they did. We'd practice, we'd do role plays. So it was more extensive training to help them deal with conflicts in their congregations. And we made on the assumption that conflict happens. It's half the time, every congregation is probably struggling to some extent, and some are in major crisis and some are in little minor sand in the shoe, I call it, irritations. And so when I left the paid employment and decided to go into retirement, I've just on occasion been called in by a church society, or I've been called in by a family, and some of the families are in different stages of challenge. So there might be a couple who may or may not want to continue to be married, and they're really in serious conflict, and they would benefit by having a third person facilitate the conversation. So I do that. Sometimes on the phone, sometimes we're on Google Hangout and we're far away from each other, but I still help people talk to each other. So now I give little workshops, like I just gave yesterday at Freiburg New Church. Actually, it was over the weekend, and it's just an hour or so orientation to what does it mean to be a mediator, to kind of demystify it all. It's not a licensed profession. It's something you can get a certificate, but you can also just learn on your own and then try it. And you could also follow somebody else who's doing it and learn some of the tools and then try it yourself. It's not as organized as, let's say, being a psychologist where you need a license, or being a lawyer where of course you need to be past the bar. So it's a fascinating tool to use. So it's been my privilege to actually help people kind of listen to each other and maybe gain understanding, and then maybe come to some agreement about how we're going to function in the future.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing about that work. It's pretty inspiring that you're not only coming into these situations where these people are trying to come together in a way that they haven't been able to, but you're also trying to uplift this skill or tool in other people, for other people.
Yep. I'd like to help people who may already be very mature adults, and they may have already learned how to not to be overreactive. That's number one. You have to not be overreactive when you hear people yelling or screaming or avoiding each other. So if people have already got that emotional regulation, and many adults do, maybe from their profession, maybe from their family life, maybe just growing up, regenerating, as Swedenborg would say, then this is just a tool. Please do this, don't do this, remember you're neutral, you're not playing favorites, you're not the decider, things like that. And so sometimes it's just those small things. And then I also point the way toward where I got trained, which is in Philadelphia, at a special mediation center. And there are many places like that people can go for a whole 40 hours and get a really good certificate, and then they feel like they're with colleagues who are also really intentionally trying to learn the profession and maybe use it as part of their job, maybe do it paid, maybe do it as a volunteer. So there seems to be an increasing number of people who are doing mediation, which is great.
Yeah, that's a nice option for people to have.
Yeah.
You know, get some training under their belt and try to serve that purpose, that career. That's wonderful. It sounds like it speaks to you. Do you feel a calling in it, like to help?
I do. Yeah. I remember the first time I was studying psychology and I was learning about birth order, when you're the firstborn or the middleborn or the later born. It is not an exact science by any means. And the stereotypes are not fair, perhaps. But I'm a middle child. And I remember giggling and thinking, it's not unusual, but middle children are negotiating between the older and the younger. That's me.
I've heard that. Were you?
We middle children very often don't get the privileges of the firstborn or the responsibility, and they resent it. And we don't get all the permissiveness of the parents who are tired of parenting the baby one.
Yeah.
And we're in the middle going, hey, what about me? Anyway, that was a funny thing. That was kind of the first time I heard about, I guess I started when I was a kid.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But then, it's more of a refined skill later. And then as I moved along in various places, I worked in a large corporation that had labor management disputes and learned from some really terrific experts about how they handle things and reduce the likelihood of the organization getting sued or having a walkout for people not going to work tomorrow because they're on strike, and they really learned how to intervene in a respectful way. So I borrowed those skills, and then I worked in a prison, and I saw how the guards sometimes were pretty authoritarian, but sometimes they also learned how to diffuse hot tempers. And I thought, I can pull from that too.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So I've been a collector of tools in what I call my conflict resolution basket. I sort of have this imaginary basket, and anywhere I can, from books, videos, training sessions, it's been fun to kind of collect them. And then when people ask me, I say, well, how many minutes or hours do you have? And I'll bring that many tools out and share them with you. So a year or so ago, the Council of Ministers for Convention invited me, and I gave a 4-hour workshop to all of the people who showed up and gave them a little packet of, here's my latest tool collection. And then last year at convention, I gave a workshop for anybody who wanted to come, and that was fun. So we had lay people and ministers, and we practiced a little bit for the afternoon. I've done it with the general church as well. So it's been fun to share it and it's like somebody gave them to me and I'm giving them to you. And even when I give them away, guess what? They teach me stuff too. Like just in the last 24 hours, 3 people have given me names of wonderful books. So I got to go get those books and add them to my toolkit and pull in some more ideas. So it's been a fun, lifelong learning thing. And then I get to practice it in some of my other volunteer work, where I work in sort of the social work area in my local community. And I use the tools there too.
Social work?
Yeah, I'm not an official social worker, but I work in 2 different agencies in my community, because at this stage of my life, I'm no longer doing scholarly work and writing any more books. I've written 5 books, but I really now want to be a doer. And so I assist in one agency. I help people who are working with women coming out of jail, and there's tremendous conflict in these women's lives. And we try to provide a safe place for them to talk about how they're feeling and what are they going to do next to try to rebuild their lives after incarceration. The social workers are the skilled people. I assist them, and that's great. I learn a lot from them. And then another agency I work with is in the family court system, and they've trained me to be an advocate for the children who are in foster care, who have really had a raw deal because parents are either addicted or they're in jail or they've abused the kids, and the children are bounced around from foster care, and so I'm their advocate.
Oh.
And there's conflict everywhere. And so I use some of the tools here and some there, and we agree to disagree. And they also, in the courthouse, if the judge decides, sometimes the judge says, this case is going to go to mediation. Now, I'm not the court mediator, but I watch the mediator handle the case. While I'm in the chair of being the advocate for the child, I'm watching this pro handle this incredibly difficult case, and he is good. And so again, I keep learning and learning and learning.
Wow.
So I'm just a little sponge. I'm not done.
Yeah, that sounds like quite the role, you know, of being able to pick up these tools from all over the place. Probably different approaches and work in different situations.
Yeah.
And it's great that you're willing to learn, you know, throughout your career and these really impactful roles, and you apply them to your other work.
Yeah, I learned here, and then I said I could use it over here, and then I learned from this guy, I use it over here. And you know, it's sort of my image of what heaven is like. You get to be a lifelong, eternal learner, and if you have a passion and you feel called to a use, and you could listen to the self-doubt about being inadequate, but you can also go learn and just have to say, can I follow you for a day? Can I shadow you for a day? Can I take a course from you? Can I look at your videos? And people are so willing to teach. And then I turn around and other people say, would you teach me? Sure, I'll teach you what I know, but also go to the experts. So I figure that in heaven, there's going to be a need for mediators, because Swedenborg tells us that there's just differences of opinion about truth and about, is there really a God? I mean, and the angels are really good mediators. They're patient. They listen, they don't interrupt, they are calm, and they wait until it's appropriate, and then they share their truth, but they also let the person have their freedom of spiritual ideas, which is amazing. And then they watch people choose, what do you want to do with the rest of your eternity? And they have amazing conversations, at least according to what Swedenborg says. So those are kind of my role models. I really would like to be like those angels.
That's a nice thing to lean into. Yeah, because Emanuel Swedenborg, the theologian that the foundation is named after, of course, like uplifts this idea of heaven, of having a lot of diversity of religion and thought, all with an orientation towards goodness and God and love.
Right.
Yeah, but it makes sense that angels would be really, which are people in heaven, according to Swedenborg, right?
That's right. They're not a different species.
Okay.
They're people that lived here and then went there. And as they got to know what they loved the most and what they understood the most, they gravitate toward a certain community. I think in one description it talks about, we think of east and west and north and south. And although there may not be exactly the same in the other world, Swedenborg describes that sort of on one continuum, it's people who like lots of detail and truth, and others want simple truths, and therefore they're happier over there. And on this dimension, as people are very affectionate, very interested in really loving things, and over there people are a little more neutral, but they're still good. And so good and truth on these continuum, and I often try to think, I've been a scholar of Swedenborg ideas and psychological ideas. I wonder where on the continuum I'll be. I'm sure Swedenborg's way over there. But I'm thirsty for new ideas a lot, and I love to try to apply them. So it'll be interesting to see where I fit on this big grid of heaven. That's my current model of what heaven might be like for all these little communities and neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about Swedenborg's vision of heaven is what you're describing, how it's distance and relative place has to do with people's internal qualities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can visit each other. And if you have a fond memory of somebody, maybe like I loved my dad, he was a wonderful guy, and I may think about him when I'm there, and he can appear. You know, it's like he takes a jet plane and he's there, but he doesn't need a plane. And so, and then we may end up choosing different heavens, but we're allowed to visit people and kind of figure out who would we be the most comfortable with. And then when we're there, it's not a passive thing. We are actively involved, like I am right now in my retirement. A retirement for me is not a passive. I love rocking chairs, but I don't sit there very long. So it's an active time, and you feel called to go do, maybe I could offer to help that family or this family or this church group. And if I'm welcome and they want to try it, great. If not, they're in freedom to say, we're done. Okay. So I figure it's going to be like that there, that people might have some friction and they could use a calm mediator. So maybe that'll be my job in heaven. Who knows?
Sounds like one of your key loves.
It is one of my key loves, right now anyway.
And you can keep growing and have, just like here, right? Heaven, actually, we're in connection with the spiritual world according to Swedenborg even now.
Even now.
So kind of
It's
leaning
like
into
right
that now.
here.
Here you are. You're already doing it.
You're
That's
already
awesome.
doing it. And if that's it, wow, that's pretty great.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people have considered you an angel in their life.
Oh, sweet.
You know, I know you came and talked with us at the Swedenborg Foundation, the board, and you know, it was nice having you there as kind of a professional mediator for, you know, what do we want to talk about? Where are we, and how can we lean into health as an organization?
Right.
And you just did a great job, you know, uplifting our voices and helping us hear each other and connect even better.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine some of the situations.
Some of them
you
are pretty
find yourself
harsh.
in.
Yeah, sometimes I pretend, like I have a cousin who is a firefighter, and he often talks about what that was like. He's a little more disabled now, but he was a really great firefighter in his youth. And he would say, everybody else is running out of the building when the house is on fire, and the firefighters are protected, and they go in. And then they look for patterns of fire. And I'm thinking that mediators are a little like that. We look for patterns of communication or miscommunication, misunderstandings, where things get mixed up. And so when I look for patterns, I'm not as fearful because I've studied them a bit, so I know, oh yeah, I remember that one. Oh, I remember that one. And then I might name them. And then we might be able to just be calm about it. And then I also, another analogy is I'm also like a verbal traffic cop. I try to ask people, please take turns talking so they don't interrupt. And if they're in the habit of screaming at each other, like a couple that's really mad at each other about a very serious issue, and they ask me to mediate, I have to kind of say, well, it's not your turn. You will get a turn. You can finish. Okay, take another minute, and I'll paraphrase back what they are feeling.
I'll interrupt to say that's probably a key thing in these situations.
It is.
Nice.
So anyway, it's to me, it's one of the millions of ways that people can serve their neighbor, and it just happens to be the one that I'm working on right now and trying to refine the skill.
And you mentioned some of the books that you've written, and I know of your altruism book and have come across some of your others. What have those been about?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious.
So I've done 5 books. 3 are in paperback form, so you actually can hold them in your hand, and 2 are downloadable. They never were in print. And so you can just go online and download those. So I'll just kind of give you a little thumbnail sketch of each of them. The first one I did, I was fascinated with the variety of legends and stories about Mary Magdalene.
Oh, that's excellent.
And a lot of people have heard of Mary Magdalene, and a lot of people have heard different stories. And so the year that I got really interested, I went to Jerusalem, and I had a guide that showed me all around Israel, and we went to what we think is where Magdala was, so it might be her roots. We're not sure, but we think so, up there on the Sea of Galilee. And then we went around more modern day and historic parts of Jerusalem. Wow. Fascinating. Anyway, so then I went to France with a group, and they were showing us stained glass windows in many medieval cathedrals. And while I was there, I had a super focus on the whole relics. I mean, I'm not part of a religious culture that has relics. Excuse me, do you need something? We're recording.
How's it going? No, you're good. We're not live. We can cut this out.
Okay.
He can edit it if you need to say something.
Yes. So I wanted to get your signature.
Me?
Yes.
Why?
Because last year at the auction, I auctioned off a rustic chair, which Dean won. He decided he wanted to make it the Everett K. Bray lecturer chair.
Oh.
So then we decided, well, we ought to get your name on the chair.
So do you want me to sign some wood?
Signing that, and then maybe we might get it burned in.
Oh,
later.
so give me some guidance. How
Yep.
big or small or?
So I think I want to be this way.
All right.
And between those two.
Between
knots.
those two. Is it okay
Yep.
if it's a signature as opposed to
Anything you want.
All right. That is so funny.
And I happen to be coming by looking for more wood, and I saw you too. So.
Ah.
Since you were leaving.
I am leaving. There you are, sir. How
Hey, you're
sweet.
leaving us today?
Right after this.
Oh.
My car's packed.
Wait, so it was perfect timing.
Good timing. Thank you. I'm honored.
I need to find out from you later about your microphone.
Yeah.
It is super deluxe, isn't it?
I'll tell you about it. It's nice.
Okay.
What is your
Some
name,
more
by the
from
way?
myself. John Crow.
Hello, John.
Hi. And I will watch your lectures later.
Okay, I think somebody recorded them if the machinery worked.
That's the beauty of that. 'Cause
Yeah, that's nice.
Yep.
I didn't
Susanna worked really hard on that. She was really trying to manage the equipment. I hope it worked.
Yeah, I did too.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John.
See you later.
All right, are we still running?
Yeah, we're still running.
Okay, so you can edit that out.
Yeah.
All right, so I got very interested in Mary Magdalene, and I also wanted to study it from a Swedenborgian point of view, because not very many of the Swedenborgian ideas are in the public arena. A lot more is from like the Da Vinci Code, or back when I was a teenager, there were 2 Broadway shows. One was Godspell, and there was, I forget the other one. But anyway, Jesus Christ Superstar. And that had bothered me to some extent. So I've been using what I call my discerning brain to collect all the legends I could find. And I read dozens of people's books, scholarly and legendary, about Mary Magdalene. And I sorted through them and then tried to use the Swedenborgian lens to say, what might be the essential Mary Magdalene? So it comes up with certain things that happen on Easter morning. It's really fascinating. So anyway, read the book. It's called Searching for Mary Magdalene.
More. No, you can't leave us there.
Well, Searching for Mary Magdalene, just go to Amazon and you'll find it.
All right.
Anyway, then
awesome.
another book I got interested in was in the General Church of the New Jerusalem, which is one branch of the Swedenborgian churches. There, 100 years ago, there was a man who wrote a book called Growth of the Mind. It was a Swedenborgian view of what we knew psychologically 100 years ago, which wasn't very much. Psychology was in its early years. But he wrote it, and it was very much a male bias. He only wrote it about males growing up and made a parallel to Jesus' life and some of the other male figures in the Bible. And me being a female persuasion, I decided to write a book called The Growth of the Female Mind. And instead of being about childhood, it's about adulthood. So I took Swedenborgian ideas and psychological ideas, and I came up with 7 phases, not exactly stages, but 7 phases we might go through as we become more spiritually mature. And then I also, because I like to paint pictures, I decided to challenge myself, and I carefully selected a dozen women in the Bible that seemed to illustrate at a key description of a story about them in the Bible. I did what I thought their face might be like, and an expression that they have, and then use that to illustrate what we might be going through as we develop. So that was fun. It was brought in biblical, brought in Swedenborgian doctrine, and as well as psychological maturity. Just to give you one example, when women are younger, we tend to be very much conformists. Most of us conform. We are tuned into what people want us to be, and so we conform. It's totally normal, but it can drive us crazy if we do that the rest of our lives. We've got to move beyond conformity, or we will never learn to really regenerate and develop a new will. We'll just be doing what everybody tells us to do, which is what has been going on for thousands of years. Women were subdued and told what to do. But Swedenborg is encouraging both men and women to mature and really develop a new will. So that book is The Growth of the Female Mind. It really is relevant to men too. I just use only examples of women. Sorry.
I think that's perfect.
But The Growth of the Mind was all boy examples. And
I think we have plenty of examples of guys.
We have lots of men examples. So I wanted to highlight some women that I didn't even know very much about in the Bible. And it was so fun to do that. I really learned about these women and have great compassion for them. My favorite is Deborah. She's a judge, and she was a wise woman. So anyway, I had fun painting them, and I put the pictures in the book. And then I would look psychologically as well as spiritually about what's going on as people become more and more spiritually mature. It's great fun.
Sounds amazing. And can we find that on Amazon as well?
Yeah, just put Soni Werner and put Growth of the Female Mind. Boom, there it is. And it'll send to you in a week. Then I got interested in altruism, and you mentioned that book. And I was interested because psychology's history in the secular world of psychology was really a lot about all of the disorders. And we had to do that. We had to name obsessive compulsive and manic depression, etc. And that was good that we did that. But Marty Seligman is the name of a psychologist about 25 years ago who decided, let's look at the positive strengths of humans as well. And so he worked really hard to develop this whole new branch called positive psychology. And altruism is one of those. And so I learned a lot from Babson and Marty Seligman and others about, well, what really is altruism? How do you describe it and explain it? And then again, I brought in a Swedenborgian point of view about the importance of serving others and how that is an integral part of charity, and it's self-examination, but also how do we serve others with a pure heart. So that's what that book is about. And I had
Beautiful.
Great fun using that as a class for my college students.
Sounds like it would be pretty powerful.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
With that class, just like in a biology college class, you have to have a lab to learn how to actually dissect a frog and do it with your real life. Well, I created this altruism class, and everybody had to do 3 hours of community service every week.
Wow.
And they had to choose where. And
That's
it might
great.
be with elders, children, at the local thrift shop or whatever. And then they would reflect on what it's like to get out of your college world, go down the street and help somebody. And go through that process of being aware of your own motives while you're doing it. Are you just doing it for credit, or are you really getting some joy out of serving other people? It was really fun.
That's
So
amazing.
Yeah, I would love that
The
class.
fact that
So
you required, like you asked them to
I said,
really
don't come to this
engage.
class unless you want to do that.
Wow.
And the class filled up, and it's been filled up ever since. And now one of my colleagues teaches the class, and I come once a year and give kind of a hello, everybody, and then she carries it forward. She's got a lot of energy.
That's nice.
So that's number 3. And then let's see. The next one I did was I went to the dark side.
Yeah?
After the light side, I went to the dark
It's not
side.
about Star Wars, is it? No.
It is not, but I do love Star Wars.
Oh, great.
But anyway, I decided.
We'll talk about that next.
Oh, I know you guys like Star Wars. Anyway, so I love learning about the conscience and how does the human being develop a conscience, and why is it that some people don't. So when I worked in this maximum security prison, I met a lot of people, and they differed from each other, but some of them seemed to have decided not to have a conscience along the way. And some were mentally challenged because maybe they'd been beat up a lot and their brain wasn't working, so the Lord's going to forgive them. But I got really interested in what happens in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood that would make somebody think it's okay to be a serial killer, things like that. So I did a lot of, in that case, to do research, I read a whole lot of neuroscience and a whole lot of forensic science from scholarly journals. So I collected about 110 current scholarly journals from all over the world, and then I organized the studies into those that have to do with how do you prevent people from being criminals, how do you intervene when they're maybe a teenager and they're just starting to break the law, like stealing a car, and then what do you do if somebody's already done crime, and is there any rehabilitation possible? So then, because my target audience was juniors in college, they can't read scholarly stuff. It'll drive them crazy. It's way above their head. So my job was to bring it down to their level and then teach them how to understand how studies are done. So that you really look at somebody. Let's say an example is children who have been in foster care for way too long and don't attach to adults have a higher risk of becoming criminals later because they don't have much care, because they haven't had people care for them. So that's a generalization. So you have to figure out, well, what's the likelihood and what can we do to keep that from happening? And then I bring in a Swedenborgian point of view about what might happen in heaven. If you've committed all your crimes, your criminal record doesn't go with you, but your loves do. If you loved stealing, if you loved killing, you loved dominating over others, that becomes apparent when you die. If you are full of remorse and you did it while you were under the influence of a drug or something, and you've done everything you can to try to rehabilitate and become a better human being, kind of like the story of Les Miserables. There was a main character who had committed a crime, and he worked
Jean
really...
Valjean,
That's right, Jean
yeah,
Valjean.
something like that.
And it's a wonderful story about can we forgive somebody who then spends the rest of his life being a good contributor to society. And so the book is really about the psychological and the spiritual ideas based on research as well as spiritual ideas from Swedenborg about looking at this very difficult subject of forensic psychology.
That is a very difficult subject.
Very difficult.
Really important one, especially when it comes to how many people are in prison nowadays.
Yeah.
And,
1 out of every 200 people in America is in prison. It's phenomenal.
And we don't see them, which is...
They're hidden down the street, but I go visit them. I
That's
work
great.
in prisons.
Wow.
And the number is increasing.
Wow.
So we've got to do more to prevent and intervene.
And to reintegrate.
And reintegrate.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons that I'm doing this volunteer work with helping women coming out of jail and helping preschool kids who are in foster care so that they won't become criminals. So I'm trying to do that right now in my volunteer work. It's very interesting.
Really? So you're doing that right now in your work?
Yeah, I'm an advocate for foster kids and trying to get them into a permanent home so they can feel safe, well cared for, and develop a relationship with good adults. Sometimes they can go back to their biological parents. And my role is to study the case and then recommend to the judge what he or she should do. And there's 100,000 people like me doing this. It's called CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates, all over America. And it's a wonderful way to say, okay, enough about writing books about it. Get out there and do something. So I've been doing it.
Great.
So I'm in the doing stage right now.
Well, sometimes a book can do have a really big impact. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
A book can have an impact, and you could teach others, but I'm at the stage where I'm no longer paid employee, and I'm going, boy, I could go down the street to where I am and get trained on how to be a court-appointed special advocate and maybe help 1 or 2 kids at a time. And it's a real privilege to get to be involved. I have a wonderful supervisor. So that's
so
interesting.
Inspiring. Soni.
There's other women and men who've been doing this for years, and I'm just a newbie. I've only been doing it for 2 years, but I'm just... People are just rolling up their sleeves saying, let's help. We can do this.
I mean, I think, you can inspire a lot of people just sharing that because, I didn't know that you could just do that.
You can do that. You can get trained. You have to get fingerprinted. They have to know if you've ever hurt anybody. It was harder for me to get into the program than it was to get into grad school. I had to have all these letters of recommendation and all these fingerprinting, and they wanted to know everybody I've ever lived with for the last 50 years,
Wow.
every roommate, did I harbor any fugitives, Yeah. So they're very thorough, which is good because I get to have access to these kids, and I want to be very careful with
That's
them.
really smart of them.
They're very careful.
Yes.
The legal system is very careful, and I appreciate that. So we supplement the social workers that work on this and the lawyers that work on this. So the last book was...
And what was that last one called?
That was called Conscience,
Conscience.
Forensic Psychology.
Sorry.
So the first word is conscience. So if you just look up
Thank
Soni
you.
Werner, Conscience, you'll find it. That one is also in... now that one I decided to make a digital book. So that's an ebook. So if you go to that, put that in Google, you can download it on your phone for $2.99.
And you go by Soni and?
Soni or Sonia Werner.
Okay.
And I'm not very consistent. Soni is S-O-N-I.
Nice.
Anyway, the last book I wrote, the college asked me to write a book, sort of like the history of psychological thought. And so, but they wanted it down to the level of a freshman. So,
Wow.
and they call it Worldviews. So I got advice from some philosophers about how to do this, but then I put it in the context of psychology. And so the book is called 6 Worldviews in Psychology. And it takes 6 different eras across time. So one is about the ancient Greeks, and then I have another one about medieval Islamic people. Did you know they invented the hospital? Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
And they invented the mental hospital in 800 AD, which is, I didn't know that. And they had a flourishing culture, and they were very careful and treated mentally ill people very well.
That's wonderful.
It really is.
Yeah.
So it changes my view of the current stereotype against Islamic people. They really tried to live their religion and build these wonderful hospitals.
Unfortunate stereotypes.
I know. So I try to teach the students, did you know? And none of them knew that hospitals came from there. They were called bimaristans in the Islamic language. Anyway, so we teach them about that and what were the key ideas derived from Muhammad that helped guide people to try to be helpful to mentally ill people. Then you jump in time.
I want to take this class.
It's
I want to
really
read this
fun.
book.
This one again is a downloadable for a mere $2.99. Anyway, so 6 worldviews. And then I jump to the Enlightenment era, which is when around the time Swedenborg, and I bring Swedenborg in too. So then I go to, in the last century, I have 3 different worldviews. One is Freud. What did he contribute and how has that helped today? And then one was Rogers, who really teaches us about listening. He really brought the humanistic psychology movement. And in each one of these eras, I go back in time and then I bring it to today. And that's really fun to say, do you know where that hospital idea came from? Do you know where it came from for us to talk about PTSD? Well, it actually started here. And so I trace the historical thread to today. And so we use current things that most people have heard about, like PTSD. Everybody knows what that is now. But that idea, you can trace it back. and give credit to those early thinkers, which is amazing. So each one had a different worldview of humans, especially mental illness, and especially what does it mean to be a well human being. So we look at both the dysfunction as well as function. And so that's what that one's about. And I bring in Swedenborg in just one of those worldviews. So that book became the outline. And again, I've left Bernathen College, and one of my colleagues is teaching that class and using that book, that downloadable book. So it helps to kind of make this vast history of psychology and views of humanity and bring them to simple, understandable concepts. And then say thank you to your ancestors who came up with these amazing ideas that help us help people. So
they are amazing ideas.
They are.
It's quite astounding, that history.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a review of what I really got my hands into when I was at a keyboard.
Yeah, that was Is it a fun process for you writing a book?
No, it's very hard. The fun part is collecting. I'm a collector. I love to collect. So researching, whether it's in forensic psychology, in the scholarly literature, or going to France to learn about Mary Magdalene. Oh, is that fun? So bringing it all in. Then I make big charts on the wall and sticky notes, and I group this and I group that. Oh, there's a chapter forming. So that part's all fun. And then you just have to force yourself to sit down and write and keep remembering your audience. In my case, it was mostly undergraduates, like psychology, but don't know very much about it yet, but they think of themselves as psychologists as soon as they take Psych 101, and I try to help them expand their knowledge and their love of being helpful, and then try to give credit where credit is due to these earlier people or these ideas that they could grasp. They're not hard to reach. And then to think, well, how will that form their particular worldview of humanity, and how do they feel called to serve? So the writing is painfully difficult for me. It does not come easy. But I do my very best, and there you have it.
I feel like you need to write a book about writing a book. That sounds like I like how you kind of approach that. You love the research part.
I do.
And you go out.
I do.
And you collect it. Like you really...
Yep.
That sounds fun.
You can't start by saying, I already know all the answers. You got to go out and find out whatever people are saying, and then figure out, how do I digest this down into understandable bites that an undergraduate can grasp today? and that's been fun. And then also because not everybody's heard of Swedenborg, I feel like I don't assume people have heard of Swedenborgian ideas, and I don't expect them to join the church if there is a church nearby. So instead I just say, just like you'd borrow from a famous philosopher, or William James, who was one of the first American psychologists, who was Swedenborgian, by the way. But you can take ideas from them and not assume that your listener or reader has ever heard of them. Just say, I'm giving credit to them, and here's some key ideas. Think about them for a while, digest them, wonder about them, discuss them. So that's been fun as a professor, is to do that. So I really love the teaching part. The writing is the hardest part for me.
Yeah.
Some people it comes really easily, not me.
Yeah. I think that would be the hardest.
It's really hard. Anyway.
Can you share some of kind of the high-level ideas of mediation?
Sure.
Like something maybe we could take away.
Sure.
I'm just curious.
If a mediator, whether it's in the context of a family or a church group that's in conflict, or between labor and management at a company, or even in Jerusalem, where you have different religious groups who all think that they own Jerusalem and they're fighting about it. Doesn't matter the context, I've found. Slight variations, of course. But the mediator is in a position to care but be neutral. Those are very interesting things. That's oil and water. And caring, loving about the health of their organization means you must not be indifferent. You must be present. You must be calm and have a hope that they can have a healthier relationship in the future. On the other side, you must be neutral. You may not have a favorite of left or right, or if there's 5 people who are fighting, you must not have a favorite. And I have to consciously think about not gravitating toward somebody who might have the same age as me, the same gender, the same family, the same English as a first language, whatever it might be. It's natural for us to gravitate to people with same demographics, but you must not. You must do your very best with your manner and with your eyes and your body position to be calm and neutral and look at each party, even if you don't agree with that person politically and you don't like the fact that that person's coming out of prison, or you don't like, you just have to set those aside.
You don't like what they've done,
yeah.
maybe.
I mean, I've worked with women who have killed their children. That's harsh. I love children. And I've worked with people who have beat up their wives. And I've worked with people who say terrible things to their wives while they're still married. And I'm trying to help them not say those things anymore so they can say better things to each other and make requests of each other. And even in churches that are holy and sacred. So my job is to try to not have a favorite person or two and to try to treat each one with respect. And I have to really practice that. But I had good role models. My dad was pretty good at this. I've had professors that taught me and others at the Mediation Training Center in Philly, and they were really good at it. And you also have to decide to get away from the worldview that there are winners and losers. So for people who are trained in being a lawyer and then come to be a mediator, that's their hard thing. They have to decide, I want to be a mediator, but I have to let go of there's a winner and a loser. Because in courts, that's what you get. But in mediation, everybody's probably going to have to compromise a little, but everybody's going to get heard. You may or may not come to a resolution, but you might. And you choose it, and the facilitator or the mediator helps them think, well, what about this? And if we changed it a little this way, and what about this? And can you add any other ideas? And you may not fix everything, but you might get one or two things. And so you might get a new procedure or a policy for a church board. Or with a family, you might get a new agreement about loaning money to each other. That's a biggie. Members that loan money to each other often really fight, even if they don't want to, even if they love their blood relative. So sometimes afterwards they say, let's write this down. I will pay you back every first Monday of the month $1,500 until I'm done. Getting it a little bit more organized, then you don't have to sue each other. And I'd like to keep things out of court where people are losing and winning and everybody wastes money. So for me, in learning the demeanor and getting trained and practiced on that has been very helpful. And then to try to pay attention to my stereotypes or my favoritism and notice them and send them away, And because I have a longing to connect with people. And so in informal circumstances, I love to talk to people and we'll find common ground. But that's not what you do in a mediation. I've got to be helping them find common ground on an issue and not just gravitate to other 67-year-old women that look like me, or people who are in my Rose family, or people who live in Pennsylvania and just say, oh, we're buddies. No, you got to be neutral. And so I think people could do it, especially if they're emotionally well-regulated. They know how to control their emotions and not flare up and be able to stay calm when other people are not calm. So those are some thoughts.
Those are, excellent things to learn from and lean into, it sounds like. Well, tough, though.
Tough.
Yeah.
Worth it.
Worth it.
Worth it.
And I like what you said about getting rid of your stereotypes and kind of the fantasy we overlay when we see certain characteristics, but they're not necessarily meaning the thing that we're implying in our own mind towards them, right?
Right.
Wow. And I bet you feel more capable at this now than years ago. What was it like in the beginning of this kind of work?
Well, again, remember childhood, I was the middle child.
I mean, you started this at an early age.
But I was not good at it, of course.
No.
But I try to win the favor of my big sister and, try to be good with the younger one. And I'm still good friends with both sisters, but
okay.
Anyway, I didn't have any idea what I'm doing. I'm just sort of watching all this family typical dynamics going on.
Well, a lot of middle children, because the older and the younger are also like just further away in age.
Yes.
They're more likely to argue, maybe.
That's right.
I don't,
Yeah. All
I've
kinds of
noticed
funny dynamics go on.
A lot of middle children feel like they're a mediator and have acted that way. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Because the older one might be 6 or 7 years older than the younger one and becomes the other parent and starts bossing the little one. Oh. But I'm only a year younger. You can't really boss me. You're not the boss of me, Sis Wendy. So we learn how to, what are other ways for me to...
Like a bridge.
Yeah. So, but as an adult, I studied psychology when I was in my 20s and 30s, and then worked in corporations and in prisons and then in schools, and then I was a director of a daycare center and was dealing with parents who had strong feelings about things and kept starting thinking. And then my dad was really focused a lot as a minister on how to be a better communicator, and so he just modeled for me, be a sponge, keep learning, learn anywhere you can. And so I really appreciated that. So I've tried to be a lifelong learner and go way beyond my comfort zone, sign up for things with people I've never met before, but they know how to do it. So I'll sign up and I'll be, not know anybody, but before I know it, everybody's coming from somewhere else and we're all trying to learn a new skill. So I encourage people who feel any inclination, especially if you've had the other experience, which is you hear screaming and you want to go like this, or if you hear people, you watch people avoid each other, they won't talk to each other. Oh, we don't talk to them. That kind of thing. I'm going, really? So if both of those are painful to observe, think about gaining some mediation skills and see if there's a way you can get people to understand each other. I mean, right now we have this political discourse going on in America. A lot of people won't listen to the other political party. And I get that. I have my own political views. But to start sending messages that you are either crazy in that other camp, or you are evil, or you are illegal, or that's another kind of stereotype and prejudgment, just because you have a different political persuasion. So to have the skill to be able to really hear another person's point of view and maybe find something you both agree on, like you want peace in this country or something like that, you want freedom, and build on that, and then respectfully disagree on other areas. That, I wish we would have a lot more mediators running all over the country, helping with the neighborhood conversations instead of just people carrying big things. Down with this person, and we hate this, and we hate that. They have their place, but I'm more called to getting people to have face-to-face conversations with somebody they disagree with. It's not easy, but it's worth trying.
Yeah, it sounds like that would be a really wonderful realm where we can find some middle ground to meet.
Yep.
And instead of kind of only really touching when we're at odds.
Yes.
And it not being very pleasant.
Yeah. I can give you a really good example in a different area, not politics, but in street gangs. Baltimore, Maryland, has unfortunately gotten more and more violent in the streets over the last century. And it's just increased. And I've met mediators who have figured out how, in the middle of the night, they don't do it in the daytime, they do it in the night when the street gangs are out there, they have created a neutral space, like a library or a basketball court or something like that, that is not the turf of this gang or this gang or this gang. And then they figure out who the leaders are. And then they get to know this leader, and they get to know this leader, and this leader. And within a few weeks or months, they get the leaders in this neutral space. And they mediate conflicts about respect. Like, if you ever saw the old movie of West Side Story.
I love that movie.
I love that movie. And that illustrates a few themes, although it's a musical, it illustrates a few themes about revenge. And I've worked with a lot of inmates who used to be in street gangs, so they've taught me a lot about people want to be respected. And if somebody from another gang comes over and does some spray paint on your building in your neighborhood, that's a sign of disrespect. So now I'm justified in going and shooting your sister. That's how the thinking goes, and it really happens. So to get people to hear each other in a respectful way, a mediator can create the respectful thing and be the verbal traffic cop so they can really hear each other. And what would respect look like to you? What would it look like to you? Well, you come over and take that paint off or repaint that, and don't deface our property. We only have this neighborhood. Don't deface it. And what about how you treat my sister? You shot at her last week. You didn't kill her, but you shot at her. Okay, and get some agreements about truce, even for a week, even for a month. Or don't visit each other's place. Or they come up with their own personal agreements about how are they going to share space in Baltimore. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm in awe of these mediators. Isn't that great?
That is great.
Yeah.
I think you're right. We need more mediators. Maybe the neighborhood mediator, or something.
We do. So, because violence will get justified because I haven't been respected, or they did this to me, I got to do it to... the ideas get escalated over and over again. So if we could train... I would love to go out and train every 13-year-old kid before they're a teenager on do you want to be a peacemaker? Do you want to be a mediator? Here's some skills you could use. And you could train a 13-year-old in some basics.
Sounds like a good class to have in most high schools.
Yeah.
Junior highs.
Yeah. Quakers have been doing this for a long time.
Really?
They advocate nonviolence, and they really encourage people to do that.
That's amazing.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's my dream. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but if I could write a book or teach a couple of classes and get some psych students to go out and do it, and just speak on behalf of these wonderful mediators who are trying to be peacemakers and help people feel respected and heard. That's my bag right now.
That's your bag.
That's my bag.
That's what you're going for. Well, I feel like if someone were to hear you talk about this and the impact it can have in so many different situations, even in our own lives, I think people would be inspired to learn more and maybe take a course.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that way.
Yeah. They could go get a non-credit course from a mediation center, or they can go, you could actually, in some places, you can get a master's degree in conflict resolution. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing.
So if you really wanted to be good at it, a super mediator, you can do that now.
I think that sounds...
Isn't that great?
Sounds good.
So I've seen a few colleges starting to offer that. So I encourage, if you're inclined, go do it.
It sounds like, and there's opportunity. I mean, there's a lot of conflict in this world.
Oh, there's so much conflict.
And people seem to... It sounds like there's opportunities to do that work. It's not like you're forcing yourself on these situations.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine was talking about, they were just going through some litigation.
Yeah.
And the person who was suing them ended up paying more to their lawyer than the settlement. That this person just said, okay, I can't take this anymore. It's settled.
Right.
And you were mentioning, these court fees and other costs associated with going to court and all these different situations really stack up over time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it often takes years if you're going to sue somebody. If you feel like you've been wrongfully dismissed from an employment, or if you feel like you were sexually harassed, and you gather up your stuff, you hire your lawyer, you do this, and it can take years and lots of money. So, for instance, in many states, including Pennsylvania, they have a central office in Harrisburg, which is their capital, and anytime somebody feels like they've been wrongfully dismissed or sexually harassed, they have to contact that organization, and then they have a lot of lawyers there that have also been trained as mediators to first try to resolve the conflict as quick as possible. And then, because I'm in a rural part of Pennsylvania, I live way up in the mountains, I've now been trained by them that if there's a case in my geographic region, I would be allowed to get the former employer and the former employee and use my mediation skills within the rules of the law. And then if we needed to get a lawyer involved, if there's going to be some kind of paperwork or settlement, then they will do that as well. But it's shorter, it's less expensive, it doesn't tie up all the courts forever and ever. So it's interesting to see even the legal system is saying we need lawyers to reduce the caseload, whether it's family, employment, sexual harassment, things like that. So I'm glad to see that they realize that some disputes might be better for their case because they have long waiting lists to get into the court, as well as for the people who may not have much money.
That's fantastic.
Isn't that good to see?
So even
it's a positive
the system,
trend.
Yeah, even the lawyers, even the court system.
They're starting to do it.
And this is the state government doing this?
In that case, it's the state government. Has to do with sort of a human rights commission, I think it's called. As well as I work in, as I mentioned, I'm a court-appointed special advocate, and that's the family court system in my county, and they even occasionally use mediators. So the judges are starting to say, we have too many conflict cases, and we're overwhelmed. Let's get some mediators. And then they will do as much as they can. And I've seen that in Philadelphia. One time I followed a court mediator around, highly trained guy. He was wonderful. And I got to shadow him as he went and handled one case after another, and I was like, wow, you're pretty great.
I blew your socks off.
I really did. I feel like a newbie compared to these guys. But, they're usually willing to let me follow them. Oh. So I have done that several times. Really, really good mediators who have seen a million cases. And I'm going, wow, oh, look at that. Wow. And then afterwards I get to ask them, why did you do this and why did you do that? They're amazing. So any of us can keep learning. And most mediators that I have met are very willing to have somebody shadow them. Isn't that great?
Go out and shadow your local mediator.
Go find one and say, may I shadow you for a day? I'll just be a little fly on the wall, watch you do what you do. I won't interrupt. And it's just amazing.
And they're used to such hard situations. I would feel like that wouldn't add much pressure to them.
It would not.
So.
I mean, one time I was following this guy, and he's a terrific mediator in Philadelphia, and he had this big table and big family fight about terrible things. And the mom had a lawyer, the dad had a lawyer, the aunt had a lawyer, the child had an advocate lawyer, and the social workers had a lawyer, and their mediators there saying, lawyers, would you all be quiet? This is for, if things get out of hand, we'll use you, but we're going to follow a mediation process, and I'm going to make sure each of these people who can get a chance to speak. And oh, by the way, the grandma that's here only speaks Spanish, so we brought in a translator. I mean, just to add another wrinkle to the complexity. And he handled it so beautifully. It was marvelous. He didn't solve everything, but he solved a lot. So people, because when those families, if they don't solve it all, they have to go into the courtroom, and the families hardly ever talk. The judge makes all the decisions, the lawyers make all the decisions, and the family have no voice. In mediation, you have a voice, an uninterrupted voice, and you get heard and respected. So it's a marvelous trend. So you can see why I'm sort of excited about it.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's a trend.
It is
a trend.
It
sounds like the movement of the future with these kind of overburdened caseloads.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's really exciting to hear. That is great.
Good.
Thank you.
If anybody's also interested, there's a professional society called the Association for Conflict Resolution, ACR, is that right? Yep.
Association for
Conflict Resolution. And it comes in various forms, but they gather people together at conferences, and you can learn how to get, where are the mediation training centers and that kind of thing. So if you're interested, that's better than going through Google and just looking for things. But to go to a nonprofit organization that is all about developing the profession, Association for Conflict Resolution. So, anyway.
Well, and I'm struck by your description of a mediator when you said, you know, a mediator needs to be like really caring, compassionate.
Yes.
Like interested in where this is going in a way, like wanting health.
Yes.
But also, how did you put it? Not detached, but
you're neutral, and you may not have favorites. Yeah. So detached is actually an interesting word. If you borrow it, maybe. Yeah, if you borrow the phrase, I think it's from 12 Step, to say detach with love.
Is that from 12 Step?
Yeah, they often encourage people who have an addict in their family to not let it eat you up if that member of your family is in disorder and constantly doing terrible things.
To be healthy.
Yep. So figure out how to take care of yourself, love them, but don't let it eat you alive. You've got to figure out how to have a little healthy boundary. It's a little bit like that. So I borrow that term, and when people are screaming at each other, because you took money out of the bank and you went to Las Vegas, blah, 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 you know, it gets pretty wild. So to care about and assume that they might talk to each other in the future in a healthy way. I have to have that hope for their future and love that future for them. And don't know when it will happen, but maybe to get there, they need to hear each other and feel respected in turn. You get respected. I paraphrase what you say. I paraphrase what you say. I summarize. Try to come up, okay, are there any areas of common ground? Do you have a request, not an accusation, but a request of the other person? And sometimes that's hard for them to do. They still want to just point fingers and say, you always do these terrible things. You know, could you make a request that somebody will stop doing something or will start doing something? And then when they start doing that, they start calming down a little because they had heard. Then we negotiate and see if we can get somewhere. And so I have to detach from the final solution, but care about the process. And try not to have any distractions of mine. So that took me a long time to learn how to do, but learning it.
Sounds tough.
It is tough. I really am learning it and have good role models and people I can shadow who are really good at it.
And then we get to learn from you and them, and maybe one day we'll all be learning from each other how to be better mediators in each other's lives.
Because conflict is going to pop up all over the place. Little things, bad things. But it's better to mediate and make sure everybody hears each other before it gets really out of hand, because it can get really bad.
Yeah.
When people get hurt and they feel like they're not respected, sometimes they justify doing terrible things to the other party, like the gang that I talked about.
Yeah.
And when that happens, then it gets escalated, and before you know it, we're burning each other's houses, and we're putting, The things people do because they didn't feel respected and they feel like they have a right to revenge. So mediation is to try to intervene before that gets out of hand, before the evil ideas really pop into people's heads.
It sounds like mediation, like taken to kind of its epitome, it's kind of like God.
Yes.
Like hoping for the best in every situation, being very present,
Yes.
and in a sense very involved,
Yes.
creating the connections
Yep.
to the extent they can,
Yeah.
but also not just like killing all the evil people, right?
That's right.
Like just, or, not making that kind of.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is that
Well, I
resonate?
think that, again, according to Swedenborg, and again, I draw from descriptions of what some of these great angels do, they never get credit to themselves. They feel the Lord is flowing through them, and they have sort of a sphere about them that is kind and has a hope for the best of the people right next to them, or the spirits right next to them. So to me, there's a lot of similarity between that and being a mediator, if I can do that. If I can hope for their future instead of going, there is no hope for that family, or that church is going to divide, those gang members are just going to eat each other up, they're going to kill each other. If I just go to that hopelessness, then I'm not channeling the Lord. The Lord really wants the best for us. I have plans for you, he says in Jeremiah. I have dreams that you're going to have a wonderful eternity. So if I can channel even a little bit of that by having hope that they will be able, these people who want to have a relationship but are in struggle now, if I can have that hope that they might be able to renegotiate rules of engagement. Maybe they'll have policies, or they'll have family rules about loaning money, or they'll take turns with the car, or whatever it is, the issue, I have hope that they will be able to negotiate a peace. And to have that hope, I think, is the gift that I can bring. And not be too Pollyanna, but to just have that calm vision that maybe they will be able to have a civil relationship in the future, and maybe even a kind one.
That's quite a gift to you that gives to them.
That's right. And it's coming through me.
Yeah.
Again, I'm trying to refine it by learning how to do it. But you feel almost like it's coming through you, and you just pray and hope that you'll be able to bring that sphere to every conflict that you get to mediate. And then you sort of pretend that it's opening up the back of my head and it's flowing through. Okay, come on through, baby. Then you don't give as much credit to yourself. You just say, okay, I could keep improving my skill level, but if I could provide that space, then maybe the angels will then work through them, and they might forgive each other. They might say, I'm sorry, which is really powerful to witness that. That's a privilege to watch somebody say, I'm really sorry. I was unfaithful in this relationship. I'm really sorry. And then they try to make amends, and they may or may not be able to continue, but to see somebody really apologize, and that usually doesn't happen until their egos calm down a little bit, and they see the effect they've had on somebody. That is a great privilege to watch that. I can't require it, but when it happens, it's really amazing. And I often end a mediated session that's kind of a structured one. I almost always end it with affirmations or thank yous, even if it's not apologies. Like I do this one family that we do it on Google Hangout, and they have been doing it for years, where about once every 2 months we get together, and from a distance, I help them talk to each other, to mend some fences that had been really harmed. And now they know, near the end, in the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to go around, and is there anybody who wants to say thank you to somebody, even for showing up to the mediation? Or is there anybody who would like to say a word of appreciation to another? That's when the angels show up. I just sit back and watch it.
Yeah.
They get soft and kind, and they say, Mom, and for the first time, the whole time, they're looking at each other and they're like, Mom, I really appreciate that you did blah, blah, blah. It's very sweet. And the week before, they couldn't talk to each other at all. So if you get to witness
really
that,
powerful. Wow.
it's really sweet. So watching that and getting a chance to be in the midst of that, you're, again, inviting the angels in a structured way so that they have a chance to say dear things to each other. And then you know that there's a chance that they might be able to rebuild their friendship or their relationship or church board or whoever it is that's been fighting. So that's a little piece of heaven.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
A little shot of glory.
It is. I'm getting teary just thinking of it, because it's very tender. You can't count on it happening, but as long as you know you're only flow through.
Yeah.
And they need to willingly choose. But I provide the structure. And if they've been through with one before, they know that there's going to be a time of either thank yous or affirmations or appreciations. And they can pass if they just don't have it in their heart. But when they say something like that, then the bonds start to build again.
Oh.
And that's where the hope is.
Yeah.
They want to be in relationship. They want to have a family reunion. Or they want to have a church picnic together instead of avoiding each other. And the group, family, church unit, business can move on. So that's really great.
That's quite the blessing.
It's quite the blessing. Well said.
And it sounds like one of the key hurdles to getting to that moment often is, you said ego.
Yes.
When the egos kind of drop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say about, maybe our own kind of struggles with ego? Because it can hold us back in all these tremendous ways, right?
I think of the example of revenge. People can get really caught up in revenge, and there's a humorous movie maybe many people know about called The Princess Bride. Have you ever seen that? It came out a couple decades ago.
Pretty famous, that one.
Pretty famous, and there's a character in there who has built his whole purpose in life to seek revenge because his father was killed by somebody, and he's spending his whole life seeking out, I'm going to revenge my father. I forget the exact words, but it's humorous, but it's like, he's obsessed with finding this person somewhere on the planet and killing him. And it's an exaggeration of what a lot of people do when they are maybe not going to kill, but they're going to do some nasty words or kill the reputation of somebody who has offended their family. Okay, so that's how big the ego can get. It can really get to the point of wishing the other person wasn't alive or that they would go far, far away. Or maybe I could ruin their reputation. And when my ego lets me say those things, you're breaking a commandment. I mean, that's how far you go, but we can justify it. So what I find in mediation is they probably felt disrespected in some way. And how can I find a place for them to feel respected and say their words, I statements, not you statements, not accusatory statements, but just when that person did this thing to my family or me or whatever, I felt disrespected. So I'll paraphrase that back. When that happened, that was really painful for you and your group or your family. And it just changed your life. And you're trying to figure out how to heal from that horrible event. And when they hear that, they hear somebody has said that back to them without agreement or disagreement. First I'll model it. Then I might ask the opposing party, would you do that too? Could you tell that person and paraphrase what you heard them say without agreement or disagreement? And when they can do that, there's less need for revenge because they feel understood and maybe a little bit respected. Whew, the ego can really calm down, and then the ideas of either killing reputation or killing somebody literally start to melt away. Wow. So that's pretty exciting when I can see that happen.
Yeah, and the ego can kind of drive us to thoughts like that towards anyone who's not respecting us throughout our day. If you're not for me clearly, then you're worthless, right? Right. And it's kind of an inversion of being connected with divinity and love.
Yeah.
No matter what your religion, that's often kind of the deep connection, the deep purpose behind it all is that loving, either a creator or even people who use like the term the universe often are talking about kind of this providence in a way, this like the caringness of this creation and the connection that we have with each other and the divine. But we can turn ourselves against that often by kind of worshiping ourselves.
That's right.
And if the person's not worshiping us, then
you're worthless.
You're worthless. Yeah.
If you are not my servant. In fact, Swedenborg quoted one statement that he saw of a pretty nasty evil spirit in the other world who walked around going, "Are you my servant? Are you my slave? Oh, if not, you're my enemy."
Oh, really?
That was how he started every conversation. He just goes, "Are you my servant, slave? Enemy? Oh." And if you're not one of those, I don't want to know you. Talk about love of dominion. So when I run that through my head, I'm going, Soni, are you looking at other people you're meeting that way? That if they're not with you, they're against you?
That's a good insight.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Great insight.
So it takes it to the extreme, and it helps you to see it in subtle ways in your own head. If you're not quite that extreme, but you go, well, if they're not serving me and letting me in this crowded traffic jam, or if they're not letting me at the front line of the food line, or if they're not letting me
Traffic's tough.
Yeah, traffic's tough.
In general, like.
Yeah, it brings out the worst in us. So if I hear that in my head, like, I own the road, then I'm just like that spirit that's right around going, if you're not serving me, you're my enemy. Oh, don't go there.
There's a part of our affection that's kind of saying that.
Yes.
We just don't hear it.
Yeah.
But it's reacting that way.
Yep.
Servant, no, enemy.
You're not beneath me, serving me, enemy.
Wow.
So we've got to figure out other categories for people. Friends, relatives, people we're helping. And
you can be oriented towards goodness and not totally be like that close to,
Yeah.
You can have people oriented towards the world and love, and they're not going to serve you,
right? Right.
The way you would like.
Right.
and we should still find love for that goodness in
That's
them.
right.
The
and
neighbor in them.
That's right. Look for something good in them.
Yeah.
And build on that. Build on that. Look for something good, and you don't have to be completely blind if they're hurting children or people or whatever. But try to find something good in somebody, and encourage that, notice that, appreciate that. And it's almost like fanning a fire, a good fire, that you're helping them become their best selves. I do that when I'm on this Wednesday morning group that I go to, that I help the social workers work with women coming out of jail. And these women have very little that they feel good about themselves. So if they do anything little that's good, like they restrain themselves from swearing at their neighbor, good job. That's self-restraint. They don't need to be sworn at again, Yeah. So, and then they feel like, oh, I can have self-control, because they haven't had a lot before. So we're affirming that. And
it's empowering.
Yeah. So you can find something little like that. Thank you for having that self-control, because there's children hearing when you're saying those nasty things to the neighbor, and it's nice to be able to affirm something little in them that they're working hard on. Yeah. Well, I think we have some visitors.
I think so.
Maybe we can come to closure here.
Well, this is a nice little segue into saying that we have to thank Freiburg New Church Academy for allowing us to record this interview on the grounds. It's been a nice week at camp.
It's been lovely, and here's some angels walking by, all doing good work.
Some wonderful people. And thank you for joining us here on the show.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. What a treat.
Quite a blessing, yeah.
Oh.
Affirmation, right? I could thank you just for coming, but I think you've blessed a lot of people from what you shared today.
Thank you. My treat.
Well, join us next time with the Transcendiots, and have a blessed day and week and year knowing that you're loved.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.